So, reducing costs and giving you best practice in supply chain was one of the aims of this morning's lectures. So good morning. So what is the background to some of these topics? Well, what are the topics that we're going to be covering today looking at supply chain? Well, here we are. Here are 7 different segments we're going to look at, from the various metrics we use, through cycle time compression, through technology, how do suppliers perform for us, and what should we do with supply chain? Should we segment them in any way? Why do we segment them? And how do they look? How do they look like? So, what is the foundation of supply chain management? Well, supply chain management is industry neutral, if you like. It doesn't matter which industry you're doing and what part of industry you're focusing upon, but supply chains are everywhere, from, as we say, from make to stock, which means from manufacturing of a physical item to keep in stock, perhaps in the sense of being pumps to repair an oil field, to make to order, where customers are having goods directly made to an order. So a company that produces tyres may produce tyres directly for order for their customers who wish to keep a series of SUV tyres of a certain size in their shelves, on their shelving. So as we say, we run right from suppliers' doors right through to your customers' doors or your own stores if you have your own businesses. And the processes we're going to be looking at are both the internal processes of the company and the internal supply chains which exist, and also the external supply chains, and how the two meet against one another. And so the areas we're going to look at, of course, are the product supply chains, the information supply chain, which people often forget about and just think is a series of emails, but how does information flow through an organisation, and when does that matter to a supply chain, and how can it get in the way of liquidity, how can it get in the way of a supply chain functioning properly, and of course the finance supply chain. How does that work? What does the operating cash cycle do? Why is it so important to shrink it down to a small number as possible? As we say here, the most important thing about a supply chain is that it moves. That goods or services flow through at a fairly constant rate as demanded by the customer. And there are not just one single supply chain. There may be a series of supply chains. For example, there may be a supply chain for paint for an automobile, but similarly there'll be a separate supply chain for the brakes. There'll be another supply chain for engine parts, and there may be a fourth supply chain for financing or for the car. So a whole series of supply chains linking together to a common goal, and some of the supply chains have their own chains within them. So, for example, if an engine is being supplied for an automobile, then the compression parts within that and the pump parts of the engine may come from different suppliers. So there'll be different supply chains all working towards a common goal. Normally, in kind of a Gantt chart type of arrangement. Large corporations use supply chain management in fairly optimized ways. They try and link them together with various best practices, inventory velocity being one of them. Inventory velocity, of course, means the speed at which we manage to move goods and services down through the supply chain to meet the goal of customer delivery on time. Cycle time compression is making sure that we're out of money for as short a period as possible. Lean logistics is keeping our costs of running what we do as light and low as possible. And again, we'll give you some examples of how certain organisations do this, and so forth. Now, complex and extended real supply chains are everywhere. As you can see from the little picture here, there are supply chains running. This is running out of China for one of my clients, who is a Chinese exporter, and we looked into his supply chains, and we drew this map over the course of about 2 hours, working out where the delivery supply chains were. And then we had a second one showing the internal supply chains within China, working out how the various internal suppliers of my supplier client worked on their own supply chains as well. So as we get more complex, chains sit within chains, and firms really want to try and control as far as possible the supply chains, because getting those wrong can often cost you more than the potential gain may be from an item, particularly when margins are short and small. If you're only running on a 5% margin, and you find that you are having to pay away 7% on some supply chain inefficiency, then it makes the whole process really rather stressful. What sort of challenges drive the supply chain agenda? Well, here is a summary done in 2015 by a number of supply chain managers at major US corporates, and we're asking serious questions as to what caused you the biggest problem. So the x-axis along the bottom tells you that, for example, that 45% of the managers queried thought that demand variability, i.e. forecasting, was the biggest factor getting in the way of their supply chain running efficiently. Other similarly bit large ones were, of course, maintaining costs, which is why, of course, we're talking about costs here on today's course. And what do we mean by supply chain visibility? What do you think that means, supply chain visibility? It means people up and down the chain knowing what's going on with other links in the chain. So if I'm relying on you sending me some parts before I can complete my product, I really need to know where you are and understand what's going on. And maybe even two rungs up the ladder, along the chain. So if I'm actually the car manufacturer and I want my supply chain to function effectively, I need to know if there are going to be any potential blockages or shortages 2 or 3 links down the chain, so I have time to react. So, and that often doesn't happen. So that's why, again, over 1/3 of all the people polled said that visibility was a big issue for them. Have a little look down the supply chain on the left-hand side of this slide, and have a quick think of which issues are ones which, if you're in supply chain management, are material to you. I would imagine for most of you, it's at least 3 or 4 of the items on there are a source of some concern to you.